Yogani, I'd like to welcome you to Truth from the Source. This is part 5 on the path to enlightenment.
Hi, Dr. Ann. It's great to be back.
Today we're talking about Asanas, Mudras, and Bandhas, which is the natural process on the path to enlightenment that we've been talking about. I'm really excited to go into this, Yogani, because some of this is really new for me. I haven't even started using this in my own practice yet. So where shall we start with this? What do you think is the most important aspect?
Well, I think from the point of view of advanced yoga practices, or AYP, which is the writings that I've been doing for the last 6 years, we'll really be looking at tying in asanas, mudras, and bandhas with the broader scope of yoga, because asanas are one of 8 limbs of yoga. And mudras and bandhas kind of get thrown in there with asanas in the 8 limbs of yoga of Patanjali.
Now, can you give us a little look at the 8 limbs again? I know we've discussed it before, but just as a reminder.
Sure. They were written centuries ago by a sage named Patanjali, and as a part of his Yoga Sutras, which form the basis of all of yoga. And the 8 limbs consist of restraints, which are codes of conduct, observances, which are codes of conduct, and then asanas, pranayama, which is breathing techniques, pratyahara, which is the introversion of sensory perception, and then concentration, or in AYP we call it attention on an object, meditation, and samadhi, which is pure consciousness, which we arrive at through the process of meditation.
So
did I get all 8?
I think you did.
I think it added up to 8.
So this entire process is opening us up and opening up the nervous system to the infinite by following this path.
That's correct.
That's enormous.
Well, it's yoga is something that has been so diverse and spread out that sometimes there's a tendency to focus on one limb or 2 limbs to the exclusion of the other limbs. And there are many schools and teachings that specialize, you could say, and that's especially apparent with asanas here in the West, where we have a great proliferation of schools that teach yoga postures. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's become somewhat synonymous, or at least overlapping, with the vast multi-billion-dollar fitness industry that we have in the West. Mm-hmm. So it's been very much approached from a physical point of view.
And we've heard so much about the asana part of yoga, as you're saying. In the West now, it's a big business. But when we talk about spontaneous openings and having a moment of enlightenment, which a lot of people have these days, there seems to be more and more of it happening. What I'm learning is that these practices will actually be able to be more sustainable through a solid practice, rather than having these spontaneous moments where I know for myself, which has actually led me to your site, AYP, when I've had spontaneous openings, it leads me to wanting more and more. And what we're saying with this practice that talking about right now is that this will give you a more sustainable experience in that consciousness.
Absolutely. Essentially what we're accomplishing with yoga is we're putting something systematic in place that we can do every day on a regular basis that will cultivate our ability within us to experience yoga, which means a union of our inner and outer aspects of life. It's possible to have those experiences, those aha moments of stillness and bliss and ecstasy, and many more people are having that these days, and there's a reason for it. But it's also possible for us to systematically cultivate our ability to have that experience on an ongoing basis. Which is, of course, something everybody would like to have.
And very beneficial.
But that's not really why most people go for a class in postures. I think it's fair to say that most people that go for a class in postures are looking for some relaxation, some improvement of fitness, some physical culture, and that sort of thing. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think it's wonderful that so many people are interested in yoga postures these days, because it's a doorway into yoga. It's a very good doorway into yoga, and it will lead to much more than relaxation. In fact, in AYP, we talk about going beyond relaxation, which is what asanas will lead you to if you do them steadily over time.
When you write in your book and you say that yoga comes from within us, can you explain that a little more?
Well, yoga actually is not something that's been developed outside of us. The whole entire system of yoga was derived based on the inner tendencies and capabilities in the human nervous system. In other words, the people who refined yoga, and in Patanjali himself, who originally documented it as a broad system, all of this was based on the observation of natural abilities that we have within us, and discovering the levers or the methods or the techniques that stimulate these capabilities that we have within us already. In fact, it's quite common for people who are meditating or doing other practices that do not involve physical postures at all, to have some physical movements and tendencies for the body to bend this way or that way, which in fact are automatic symptoms of many yoga postures that you see in systematic curriculums of yoga practices. So that's coming from within. And furthermore, all of the limbs of yoga are connected. So if you're doing yoga postures, you may find yourself having more of a tendency to want to go and learn meditation, or wanting to learn some pranayama breathing techniques, and so forth. And so it's all wired within us, the whole system of yoga. And the formal systems that we see out there in the schools and the traditions that we see are outer manifestations of what's inside all of us.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's hard to imagine that some of the pretzel shapes that we get into with our yoga practices comes naturally from within us.
Yeah, well, I guess, like with anything else, you can get a little carried away if you want to. It's a combination of what's natural and what's mental.
Yes.
Sometimes the mental takes over.
I should say here that the postures are described in detail in your book, the Asanas, Mudras and Bandhas. And you do go into it in quite detail, don't you?
That's correct. In fact, we have what I call an asana starter kit in two of the books. The large textbook called Advanced Yoga Practices, Easy Lessons for Ecstatic Living, and then the smaller Asanas, Mudras, and Bandhas book. They both include what I call a starter kit, and also they include an abbreviated starter kit, which includes a much smaller routine that can be done standing up anywhere that you happen to be, including an airport, waiting room, or whatever. We don't pretend to be, how should we say, the last or greatest word on asanas in AYP. We use asanas as essentially a warm-up for sitting practices such as spinal breathing, pranayama, and deep meditation, which we've covered in previous interviews. So you really have to take that approach if you're going to be addressing the full scope of yoga, because if you just focus on asanas, you just won't have enough time in the day to balance it with meditation and pranayama and other techniques that we talk about.
Yes, because it gets quite time-consuming when you add all of these together. So you have to put together very practical practice.
Yeah, and when you have these alternatives for integration of a range of techniques that pull the levers of a number of different capabilities within you, it's really prudent to balance them. If you're doing, 2 hours of asanas, you're really not going to be in a position to sit down and meditate twice a day. Likewise, if you're meditating for 2 hours a day or doing pranayama for 2 hours a day, you're not going to really be able to have a good integration with yoga postures either. In fact,